But in this book, he's talking about how Friends episodes, even if you don't know like the story, like you can watch an episode on silent and you can still kind of tell what's going on. This guy sees that these two people are doing stuff in a window. He's angry. He comes to their door, starts knocking, says, "Let me in." He comes in. He's chasing the one guy around the room, and the other girl's pleading with him to stop. You can just sort of tell this is happening. And it's this episode where like Ross has like found out that Chandler and Monica are together, and he sees through the window, and then like the whole thing's happening. But it says that you can follow that with facial expressions, just by knowing like what the action is. You don't even need to know English to understand. He's mad at her, and he's mad at him, and he's running around chasing him. So it's kind of like what you say. Like if you watch it as a play, sometimes that can add the context you need, the emotional context, to understand the words that are on their own just kind of complicated. But then additionally too, there's a lot of oration here that's meant to just be flowery and. Not always is there full on like straight communication, because they do a lot of monologues. People do. It's like they're dialogic monologues, like where they do monologues at each other. It's almost like rap battles, you know?
I just
Like
don't know if it's like off to the when they're in the middle of talking to someone and says off to the side.
yeah, and they're just looking at you, and you're like, whoa.
And say something to themselves and then go back to the conversation.
Yeah.
And it's just like because they can't hear you if you turn.
The 15th century is just full of shonen characters. They just have monologues all the time.
At least on the stage.
Yeah.
So this folktale. So at the time, there had already been a play called Lear, written by, I can't remember the guy's name, but it was some other guy who had written a play called Lear. And it was based on this folktale that already existed called Love Like Salt. So the way this folktale went, and everybody knew this is like hearing the tortoise and the hare. Okay? You're like, okay, I know this one. So what happened in this Love Like Salt is there was a father, and he was essentially like the royalty in the town, and he had 3 daughters, and he said, "I would like to reward you all. It's like I'm going to give you a piece of the kingdom based on your answer to this question." And it sounds like really familiar, right? Like that's literally the story of Lear, like we just talked about that. And the first one says like, "Tell me how much you love me." Or he says, "Tell me how much you love me." And the first one says, "I love you more than life itself." And Dad goes, "Oh, wow. That's really good. Life is really important to all of us. Yes. Here's your portion of the kingdom." And the next one says, "I love you like, I love you more than the whole world. More than anything in the world." Huh? Maybe like stars in the sky, but it's like, "I love you more than the," I thought the word version I heard was like, "I love you more than the whole world, like more than everything that we know of." And he's like, "Wow, that's a whole lot of stuff. Yes, you can have your good portion of the kingdom too." And the last daughter goes, "I love you like fresh meat loves salt." And he says, "No, that's a stupid answer. I don't like that at all. Give me something better. Give me something better." She goes, "No, I love you like fresh meat loves salt." And he's like, "You suck. Get out of here. I disown you." And so she's got to go make her living somewhere else. So she goes and works for a maid for some guy, but she for some reason adopts this disguise, and like disguises herself as kind of a different type of person, like starts dressing differently or something. And so she's working as a maid, and you know, as in all folk tales, you know, a woman working for a man, eventually they fall in love. So he's like this dude in the town, some like, you know, well-to-do person. So they fall in love and they're gonna get married. And the wedding feast is about to happen. Of course, the royalty in the town, he gets invited to the wedding feast, as he must. And like there's like the feast, and then there's gonna be the wedding. So there's the wedding, and then afterwards is the feast. So they get married, and then when the wedding feast comes, she's given them all the instruction. The cooks, she says, "I want all the meat that is cooked today, every bit of it, to have no salt, not in the preservation, not in the preparation, none of it. This is meat that is unsalted in any part of the process." And they're like, "That's going to be horrible." She's like, that's what I want you to do." And they're like, "Okay." So they make this crappy meat, and it goes out to all the wedding guests, and her dad like gets it, and he takes a bite, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, this is awful. What's wrong?" They're like, "Well, there's no salt in the meat. It was instructed." It's like, "Oh my gosh, this is horrible." I made a terrible mistake. My daughter does love me. And she goes, it's me. I'm your daughter. And he's like, I'm so sorry. And she's like, it's okay. You didn't know. I had to show you. And then they all live happily ever after. But that's how that story goes, is it ends happily ever after. And when the play version's made, that also ended happily ever after. And it was called Lear. So when this was presented to the audience, the very first playbill would have said, The Chronicle History of King Lear. And everybody's like, I know Lear. I know that story. Another Shakespearean comedy. Because I thought I pointed out to a couple of people.
Yes, you did. That was awesome.
That I found this, and I just was like, hey, I'm going to look it up and see the veracity of this claim. Let's see. What are we going to do? We're going to do my usual thing. Now that I've discovered this, I just love it. It's just and it's also comical. Like every time, I'm gonna get it. So if you all look, whoa, little too close. Look, getting a little intimate there.
Move your big fist.
See, like you can see right here. So if you look, I don't know if you can tell anything from this, Emily, but this is a list of Shakespeare's plays by genre. So if you look, he actually has more comedies than he has tragedies.
So many Henrys.
Now, his history plays often, history ends up becoming somewhat tragic, and a lot of people die in the histories. But so I mean, really, you could make the argument that he has more death-like plays than he does funny plays. But he's often known by some teachers for his funny plays, and those are the ones often we've heard a lot about, is these comedies where everybody ends up sort of living at the end and being happy. And there's only a few of these tragedies we actually read. I mean, people will read in school classrooms like Hamlet, sometimes Julius Caesar, King Lear, Macbeth, Othello, Romeo and Juliet. But we don't really read the other ones as much. But a lot of these we end up doing, like All's Well That Ends Well, As You Like It, Merchant of Venice, Merry Wives of Windsor, Midsummer Night's Dream, Much Ado About Nothing, Taming of the Shrew, Tempest, Twelfth Night. Those are all very well read as well. So he actually has, I think, more popular comedies than he has tragedies. It's just that tragedies that he has written are more popular with English teachers usually because of the depth of emotion that's there, as opposed to, say, a comedy where there's a reason at the Golden Globes they still, even to this day, have a separate Golden Globe award for comedy actors versus dramatic actors. And if you look at the Oscars, very rarely do comedic actors win the Oscar for Best Actor and Best Actress, because there's less of a respect there, I think, because people consider there to be more depth of emotion in a dramatic performance, even though it's universally acknowledged by a number of actors I've seen have expressed before, it's so hard to do comedy. I say it's really hard to be funny.
Well, hell, Jim Carrey said it was easier to do his comedies than it was to do his serious movies that he's done.
I think it depends on your sort of the way you are. But if you look at somebody it'd be really interesting to talk to somebody say Walter White. That would be a guy to talk to. How do you do both?
Well, that's what I was going to say. Then you look back at old interviews with Robin Williams, and he said it was easier for him to do the dramatic roles than it was for him to do the comedic roles.
So many people have different, what is it called? Tastes of comedy.
Yeah, that's true.
Thinks everything is funny.
I'm gonna say,
I like really dry sarcastic.
I have trouble teaching to students who don't value humor. I just what's my way in with them? How do I like a fake dad joke, and they're just I don't understand why I should be laughing at that at all.
It's got a $20 bill.
I don't think I can hand 20s to students.
You
I
can.
would take it. We'll
Huh?
take it. I would take
Yeah.
it. I need the money. I don't know your better.
Everybody's ready to welcome to English 1301. It's Making It Rain 101.
Only
Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun.
for the students that don't like your humor. So you don't think I'm funny? What about now?
What if I took them a meme that I don't find funny, and I just show them that? I'm like, I don't get this, and they're like, haha, okay. And I'm like, oh, okay, so you're like my daughter basically. Because anything that I don't find funny, she was like, look at this, and I'm just like, it's blurry, I can't even tell what I'm looking at, it's poorly constructed, the grammar is bad, everything's bad with this.
I was gonna ask, so tragedies are commonly taught with English and whatnot, but being in theater and stuff, we learned more about the comedy.
Yes, theater classroom, they often do the comedies, yeah.
I just didn't know if that was for a reason, or you guys just don't
No,
like to laugh?
I think that is a common thing from a lot of theater productions generally, and honestly, I think it's the same reasoning. People are generally, they like comedies more. People want to laugh. They want to use art as an escape. So then when they all showed up to Chronicle History of King Lear, I think the problem wasn't actually, this was only performed, I think, as a tragedy a few times in the beginning. It did not have a very long run. People were kind of pissed off because they show up to King Lear and they're like, love like salt, and it's like have you ever seen, I can't remember what the name of the thing is, there's this Comedy Central running gag video that came out many years ago. Too Many Cooks. You ever heard of this video? It's like a 90s television show opening that just never stops and then gets really, really dark. Like, it's really, you expect what you're going to be watching is just this funny thing, and then it gets super duper serious. But it's still in the nature of a joke. But it's kind of like King Lear would have had almost the effect of, say, reading A Good Man Is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor. Did y'all read that in your class? I know you read it in mine, but did y'all read it in the other class? Good Man Is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor starts out as this grandma who she's so disrespectful to people, but she's just comically has to insert herself into everything. And she's there's all this comedic moments, and it's basically a sitcom where the grandma wants everything to go her way, but the family is not wanting to do things her way, so she lies about it to make it go her way. And there's occasionally the mention of this guy named the Misfit who's out on the run. He's this criminal on the run. But then the car ends up wrecking as a result of the misdecisions she's made and the directions she's pointed them in. And the Misfit just shows up in this random location and then killed the whole family. So the story starts out as this kind of sitcom that turns super dark and everybody dies.
A sitcom where you hate your grandma the whole time.
Yeah, it's weird. It's almost like watching. It's like if everybody hated the first season of The Office, where The Office continues and continues, and at the very end of the first season, you just see him get shot and killed in a dramatic moment. And you're like, what? What?
I would have just been so happy.
The first season was not great. You're you don't like Michael.
It usually takes a season or two for shows to kind of get their rhythm. They were just kind of.
No, but then you get to the episodes where D'Angelo's about to take over, and you're like.
It was actually, they were going to cancel The Office.
Yeah.
But because they tried to make it too much like the David Brent one. But what happened, the only reason they ended up continuing The Office, or one of the main reasons, was because...
Jim and Pam?
No.
Really?
The 40-Year-Old Virgin. It came out, catapulted Steve Carell to fame, and they realized that people were going to watch it just because he was the main actor. And so they really retooled all the characters to where they made Michael have sympathetic qualities. He nonetheless has a good heart now. He's just sort of like the awkward uncle.
I started getting annoyed with him.
I
When
really-
that happened, it was
Yeah,
like,
I really didn't actually enjoy The Office much until the end before he leaves, because it's just.
Did you get offended when somebody said for a moment they didn't enjoy The Office that
I
much,
love The Office.
Emily?
I've seen it 11 times. It's one of my favorite shows. It's just,
You can always tell when Emily she was like, oh, I didn't at first like The Office, and was like, ugh,
the
ugh.
first 4 seasons are very good.
Don't say anything bad about Friends.
I've never seen Friends. I'm not
That's
a
true.
garbage human being.
That's one of the few shows I've watched that starts out.
This is the part where Emily fakes a dramatic death on screen. She was like, I was so good at theater. No, I think one of the reasons that they do in theaters, classes, they do a lot of comedies, is because they usually have much larger casts. Those casts end up not making only a few people shine, because lots of people get to be on stage all the time and they don't end up dying. Whereas in tragedies, a lot of people end up dying, and so it puts one person as kind of the star who ends up surviving.
That's what I would think too, but whenever they did one act, whenever I was.
Competition's different because you can't win unless you do dramatic.
We did comedy and we made it to state. We got really far, and all the other people did comedies, and all the tragedies, which I thought were wonderful, and a lot of them were dark and
Yeah.
Well, it all depends on the judges that you have.
Yeah, it really does.
Because our judge says, I didn't laugh once watching you whenever Everyone was not stopping laughing. But,
Yeah.
anyway, but it was, I don't know, it almost felt backwards. Like they almost expected like a higher standard, and I wonder if it'd be vice versa for like English to, like you give someone a comedy in English, they're gonna want to read it. I guess. I don't know. Just seems weird.
Yeah, it is. It's just sort of like, I guess, the difference of what we're trying to, like, English teachers are going to be trying to get the complexity of human emotion, whereas theater is going to be trying to use it for more of its production capacity and, like, put something on that it's you literally, when you're putting a production on, we make people read things, English teachers do. It doesn't really matter if you enjoy them. But a play production, you want people to show up beyond just the family.
You also want the cast to enjoy it.
Yeah, you want a cast to have fun doing it and learning these lines,
Well,
and
that's what I
so.
was gonna say, like last spring, I think was when I took it. I had theater, so I had Van Bay.
Yeah.
And she said that she loved doing comedies over tragedies because people actually enjoyed showing up for rehearsal and actually enjoyed putting on the performance. Which makes sense because you're not sitting there depressing everybody every other scene.
Yeah.
I don't know. You can make
No,
you can make me feel bad. Like you're doing pretty good tonight.
No, I mean, like, I actually went to, like, when I was in that class, went to, like, tragedies and shit. I hate going to performances. Yeah, I don't like going to actual performances.
You would never like Hamilton. It's way more humorous than.
No, I know. I've heard about
It's
that.
amazing.
I've never wanted to see him.
Oh no, we
Like,
want to see Hamilton. You're wrong.
people were, people always told me that it was really funny and, like, everything. I was like, that's great. Everything
It's not like.
Manuel Miranda does is.
And see, here's the thing too. Is I mean, I'm sure that hopefully the teacher went over like the theater definitions of comedy and tragedy,
Yeah.
right? So comedy is just
Yes.
where essentially the ending is fairly positive, whereas tragedy is
Oh.
kind of negative.
Yeah.
And so really, if you look at it, people always get pissed off at the Oscars. And that was a gross generalization, by the way. But if you look at it, people always get mad at the Oscars for not putting more of those feel-good movies like on the list of like, where's Avengers Endgame? If you think about Avengers Endgame, when you really look at it, yeah, we have a character or two that maybe go away, but for the most part, it's a comedy. It's where everybody ends up sort of like things turn out well in the end.
What's weird is if you look at the older Marvel movies, they weren't that way. Like the first Iron Man, I think was really, maybe it's the second one where it really started bringing more of a comedy aspect into it. If you look at like the original, like ones that were bigger, they didn't have nearly as much comedy, which is.
Well, look at that.
And now, are you using comedy in the hilarity sense, or are you talking about comedy in the
I think
people
how
living
weird
in?
it is. People living, like they obviously live like.
Yeah. Like the main characters almost always live in these films. That's one of the reasons people keep going back to them. It's like, it was why one of the reasons. It's like you literally had to spend 21 films building up to the possibility of having an audience that might be okay with, as long as they knew there was a part 2. Half of all civilization being wiped out, and everybody's like, "The hell is this? How this ends?"
I remember when I went to that. My little brother had already seen it. He was like, "Man, you're gonna love this ending." I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, I already know what's gonna. I've read the comics. I know what's gonna."
Yeah.
And then it happens, and I'm like, "Fucking tell me."
But literally, the only reason we're even able to put up with that one tragedy is because we've already seen 22 comedies, and because they tell us, "Hey, there's a part 2 coming."
Yeah.
So that people really don't, unless it's an isolated incident. We don't. A lot of people don't like, and that's one of the reasons I think people like Game of Thrones only worked as a TV show. Because I mean, I'm not gonna like tell you the whole ending of it, but it kind of ended more because there's so many characters. There's so many characters. Okay, there's so many characters.
Are you really done?
Huh? Well, there are so many characters in that show that some of them have tragic endings, some of them have fairly positive endings. And people weren't ready for all the tragic endings, basically, because I think they all wanted it to turn out to be a comedy. And there's literally a character who at one point says, if you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention, or something like
Yeah,
that.
it was the girl who played Sansa. She, in an interview, said, if you think this is gonna be good or have a happy ending for everybody, you're wrong.
No, there's a character who says
no,
that.
I know, but actually in an
And wasn't it
interview, she
Littlefinger?
says that as well.
Or Varys?
It sounds like Littlefinger thing.
I don't know. There was somebody who said like, it's like if you think this is going to end well, you haven't been paying attention, or something like this. Or I can't remember. I mean, literally, we're primed for the first season to know what to expect, and we still don't expect it. We're primed for comedy. Like, we always expect to see happy, and we get a truly tragic ending. It just kind of throws us. That's why it's such a triumph, I think, sometimes for films to do that, because like it takes courage to give people a tragic ending
I
and
never expected anything.
do that.
I didn't have a problem with the tragedy
So is it
ending.
worth
I just, they
watching?
didn't do it well.
No. It was not set up as well as it could be. But if you look at it, the pieces were all there. It was just like the execution was bad. It was like I saw a drawing somewhere of like a horse where like the horse's front was very good, but as they got further toward the tail, it was just like a stick figure.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it felt. The show just sort of died out at the end.
Everything
By the way,
going,
it
and
was-
they were just like,
I don't know who here has seen it or not, so I'm not gonna ruin it, but it was before a certain person lost a hand. It was before he cut it off.
Oh, okay.
I'm
Yeah.
trying not to, just in case some.
Yeah.
Before.
I want to.
It was before he cut it off.
He's talking about Ace Ventura. Remember,
Don't
no,
spoil
I agree with it.
What?
No, Ace Ventura is not.
Ace Ventura? You never.
I have Jason Momoa.
You didn't want me to ruin Ace Ventura? Is that what you said?
No,
Don't
no,
spoil
she
Ace
thought that
Ventura.
Jim Carrey might have actually been in there.
No, I thought y'all were talking about Game of
No,
No.
I mean,
No, we weren't talking about that
are,
anymore.
but
We
not
already-
really because Jim Carrey, Ace Ventura.
I was making a
really
joke.
not in that show.
Okay, so everybody who showed up to the Chronicle History of King Lear expected to see a comedy. They were like, it's called history, blah, blah, blah. But we know King Lear. We know the folktale. We know it's going to have a happy ending. We know this because we've seen it dozens of times. But essentially what happens is they show up and they watch the tortoise and the hare wins, and they cook the turtle. That's kind of what we ended up showing up for. It was almost like a Grimm's fairy tale. The real Grimm's fairy tales were like, from what I understand, the real Grimm's fairy tales, I haven't read a lot of it. Like they actually had like really depressing, tragic.
Yeah.
Hansel and Gretel actually get cooked. Isn't that like how it actually?
Yeah.
It says, "Don't go into a witch's house because you'll die." Like that's essentially what it's trying to communicate. And everybody's like, "Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
okay."
everybody in the Little Mermaid dies.
Yeah, she turns to
Except for
foam.
Triton, yeah.
Yeah.
She what?
She turns into sea foam.
She turns into sea foam.
Yeah.
Yeah, Triton turns her into sea foam.
Because she didn't marry Prince Eric, he married Ursula.
And then like the whole time that she's walking around as human, her feet are bleeding. Yeah, it's messed up.
Cinderella's sisters, they cut off their toes, so the.
Oh yeah, I remember
Yeah,
that.
they cut off the
Sleeping
heel and
Beauty
stuff.
gets raped by the 7 dwarves.
What the heck?
So
Yes.
bad.
Oh wait, does Jack and Jill have one? Or is that just a song?
I think that's just a random stuff.
Well, because it pops up in one of the poems in Britlit too. That's why I was curious. It's that because Jack and Jill have like a weird. It says Jill goes down on her back, like in one of the lines from like an Auden poem, and it was like so basically like at the top of the hill, Jack has sex with Jill,
Mhm.
and that's like not the way the story is usually told. But I didn't think it was a fairy tale relationship. I guess then. The lily white roarer. I can't remember what all the words are, but anyways. So yeah, everybody showed up expecting to see a comedy, and they did not get a comedy. Something else I feel it's important to mention is I noticed when I was reading the comments, you know, the discussion post this week, I'm reading, and everything's just sort of going like it's kind of I'm expecting to. Well, I don't know, maybe there was one like a surprise, but when I got to Emily's, and Emily had not mentioned scripture at all. And like usually Emily has something to say about like, you know, religious scripture and how it's used in the stuff. And I was like, I kind of gotten used to, you know, it's kind of like what I expect to see. And I went, oh, she didn't really mention it here. Like you kind of talked about something else, like the interesting nature of disguises and the sister poisoning, and you know, Lear sort of dies as a result of his own actions. And I was like, well, then why not the scripture? And I went, oh yeah, this in the other Lear play, the one that had already been produced, that was a comedy, lots of Christianity in it, tons of it. In fact, it was like Lear essentially realizes the error of his ways because he's a godly man and he understands, like that kind of thing. But this seems to have no godliness in it, right? No Christianity. It seems to be, in fact, if there is anything, it's like pagan. Like there's usually pagan references made to like Greek gods and like Roman gods and things. But that was like an intentional decision too, that like I think Shakespeare wanted it to be like this landscape of like, I don't know, almost devoid of hope. Like, so you just sort of, is that up against the wall? What is going on?
They're in like England and France, so it's already devoted to hope.
Just turn it, like turn it the other way, where it's not pointed at you, but it's still, or if you want it, you can make it pointed at you. Turn it where it's facing Jessica, who's not actually there.
Yeah, you just don't want to have a good.
Yeah, because what we're hearing is the entire fan shake because it's trying to suck air against a wall.
Shake.
By the way, never put a couch directly in front of an air conditioning vent in your home. It's a bad decision. Just so you know. So we talked about tons of tragedies. We talked about the gods. How it's almost it's devoid of religious hope entirely.
Context for everything.
Tragedy.
Yeah, he was like,
Never.
Aaron didn't finish it.
Have I told you that? This is an interesting thing about me. My grandparents
Okay.
are Norse pagans, traditionally.
Norse pagans traditionally.
Because their grandparents were immigrants from Scandinavia.
Huh.
Yeah. So my grandparents are full-on like pagans.
And what does that mean by saying pagan?
Well, like
They're
you
just
know,
not
they like,
Christian?
Well, like Norse pagans.
Oh, they believe in the Norse gods?
Yeah, like the
Oh,
Norse
okay,
gods,
cool.
Yeah. That's
So they're like full on, like Thor's not a character then. That's like a god.
No, yeah.
You say Scandinavian.
See, that's the only reason. They got me this when I was born.
When you were born?
Yeah.
So how long have you carried it?
I mean, most.
Probably not since you were born because.
No. But I'm just saying, like every now and then. Yeah, that's what it's a Mjolnir, and it's
Oh,
what
that's cool.
the people of the Norse originally.
I wanted to get the Mjolnir that's what Thor's hammer's named. I wanted the one that they have at Hobby Lobby that's actually kind of really realistic. But I was looking for something that had wood on it so I could put it on a keychain. I could knock on it. And have any wood.
Like a full on. I you said keychain. I was thinking
Like a massive, like, no, it's a really cool looking, if you go to Hobby Lobby, look at the keychain area, like there's like a really cool, like actual, like Thor Marvel Mjolnir, like sitting there, and it's really awesome looking. Hey, we turned the fan because it started shaking against the wall, just so you know. So you have to turn it back to get past it, and then you have to turn it back in.
can hop over.
You don't have to hop. I don't want to like risk injury from like just needing to hop over. You can turn it back also, by the way.
Pagan, I thought of like witchcraft, you know? 'Cause
Yeah, that's what I think too, like
Yeah, that's
witchcraft.
what I remember.
Sharon's like, everybody, no.
I'm actually a witch.
Jarrett Witcherson. So, Michaela, when we were talking about the comedy stuff, you were right on point for saying you really did not like, or maybe you didn't think the death of Cordelia at the end, like, is right.
Yeah.
It's just not fair. Like, she was the good person. She was the one who was honest. Why does she have to die? And then what did I give you? Did you recognize the quote that I gave you?
I didn't look at it.
You didn't look at it? I didn't say it was a quote. I just said it. But I said, what was it I said? I said, life isn't fair. Or life is pain. Anyone who says differently is selling something.
I hate when people say life isn't fair. Like,
I mean-
why is that important to say to kids? Like, life isn't
I was
fair.
literally in church one time,
Yeah.
me and my sister were like talking, and he was like, "That's not fair." And then this guy in front of us, he turns around, and he goes, "Life isn't fair." I never talked to this person ever, and then just.
I was always told from a young age, life starts when you die. So that's just sort of.
Oh my god.
That was. I mean, it's what I like.
I've always just got the phrase "life's a bitch."
Yeah, honestly, like.
Well, I guess nobody recognized that. It was essentially, it's a quote from Princess Bride.
I've never seen
I
that.
remember.
movie.
Life is pain, Highness.
Anyone trying to say.
Never seen it.
Anyone who says differently is selling something. But that's interesting. What was life isn't fair? Why would you not tell? Why do you not think? Why? I don't understand. Everybody seems to have a problem with the idea that life isn't fair
Yeah, why would you tell
I didn't have a
somebody
problem.
that? Like,
I mean,
because it's honest.
but it's annoying, like, to hear
Okay, but if
that.
it's
And
so
like when
hon-
people tell other
Do you
people
want
that,
them
it's
to get like a
okay.
different?
Oh, like are you saying like they say it as a response to somebody saying that's not fair?
Yes, they do.
Oh, well, I mean, we like to seek out fairness and justice, but it's just like we talked about when I was in the other class and there was a lady with a pet dog, and it's a guy cheating on his wife, and she's cheating on her husband, and they get together, and the story doesn't punish them. And everybody's like, I don't like this. We're supposed to like get the message that cheating's bad, or that at least they get punished. And I'm like, well, why? And life doesn't always work that way. I mean, we probably know a couple right now that they used to be married to other people. They started doing some stuff behind each other's spouses' backs, and then now they're married and they're happy. Whereas the other two spouses, they're just divorced and unhappy and trying to look for somebody, but they're too old to make something happen.
I do know something.
Yeah, so it's something that happens every day. We like to pretend like life is fair when for some people life works out okay and some people it just doesn't. Sometimes the person who's honest ends up suffering from it. I mean, take a look at the guy who said, hey, this Guantanamo Bay stuff where like they're taking pictures with dead bodies and like the soldiers are posing and, you know, making these prisoners perform sexual acts on each other. That's not right. And then they were like, how dare you like call out veterans, like you're anti-American. The guy literally was honest, said this is bad that's happening, we need to stop it. and he ended up enduring death threats, and his family had to go into hiding. I mean, the world is not fair. Usually, honesty is rewarded with consequences, and the liars prosper. I mean, that's the world.
That's just life.
Yeah, that's just the world. I mean, survival of the fittest. It's the laws of, those who take up more space get it, and those who slink into the shadows get pushed into the shadows.
That's why the ending of this was my favorite part, just because it's not enough things end like badly.
Like nobody has the courage to end something like this.
Well,
Yeah.
Because that's how it sort of is in like real life. Like you look at
That's why I like.
the king of what was it, Poland, I think at the time, who like was also ruler over Hungary, and then he just dies whenever he's fighting the Ottomans. Like this is the thing that happened, and they didn't have a king. Just we're just gonna have to worry about this. Like it's a thing that happens. People die. You gotta.
One of the reasons I love Game of Thrones so much in the beginning, and as I went through the show, sorry, Aaron, is that sometimes, have you seen any of it?
No.
Not a bit. Well, I'm just gonna tell you. I'm sure you've heard this about Game of Thrones. At least
I want to.
you've heard of it in conversation. But essentially, like one of the things people love about it is it doesn't give you what you expect all the time, which is that the characters that you come to love over time, they don't always just end up getting a happy ending. Like they just, I mean, it's honest about like, and that's the thing. The guy who wrote Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin, he actually loves history, and a lot of his study he did was in what was happening in like medieval history, and empires. And he would say, what is the thing that literally happened? And then he would sort of like encode that into like what happens in the story. And he's like, because this kind of crap happens. And he just sort of made sure it led up to that. And he had like all the breadcrumbs there where if you follow them, you realize, oh, okay, well, yeah, I should have expected it. There's sometimes moments in that show that are like so shocking and horrible. And you're like, this is my fault. Like I got too happy, I got too comfortable, and I essentially killed these people. Like it's my fault. I should have expected it.
Oh no. I can't watch the last season. I'm scared.
You don't want to watch the last season?
I haven't seen it. I'm scared.
Nah, the quality's
I
not that
it's
great.
really bad, but
Season 1 through 7 is great.
The thing is, if you just look at the outline, like if you looked at like the outline they had on the table, and they were like, here are the events that have to happen, and somebody if I honestly think that you would be okay with Game of Thrones if you watched the whole thing and somebody gave you a summary of the last season, and you'd be like, oh, no, oh. That's a great ending. But if you watch it, you're like, wow, is that really? This is how they did with it?
That's because it's so the last season's so rushed. Like
Yeah, you can just tell. It's like somebody waited till it's like a student procrastinating on an essay is kind of how it feels. Like
name brand.
you knew where you were going with it, but you just didn't like plan it out well enough to make it execute.
Why is Jeff always looking at me like
Who?
Jeff, I can feel his beady little eyes.
Because he knows you.
Because she straight told me she has to
And not only that, but you're like, well, not only that, but you're like this, like, why is he always looking at me? And you're like everybody's standing stock still in the room, facing this direction, and then you all of a sudden, he's looking at me, like I was just moving or something. You become like an eye man. You're like, huh, what? What do you have to tell me something? No, I was just seeing if you're looking at me. Of course I am now. Usually Jeff's looking directly at me because I'm the most interesting person in the room. Or because you're required to because it helps your grade. Because you're like, if I just look at the guy, he'll think I like him and I can get the score. It's all. Just pretend. Just pretend. Yes, what he said. This was that video I showed y'all. It's like, yeah, what we have to remember is, hold on while Jeff looks this up on, Larry David is Jewish. When we can't forget that, so is Sanders. Like that video. And that actually brings us actually to the Jarrett, Lust for Greed and Power story is incredibly relevant to our times. Yes, it is. Lust for Greed and Power.
Did I say it?
That's I mean, you didn't say it in those words, but that was essentially, you were like, you appreciated that the story did that and talked about those themes in sort of an honest way. Which we're sort of saying, did I already mention? I think I mentioned all of this in this class actually so far. Was the Blizzard thing and the Hong Kong thing?
I was like,
Yeah.
Did I mention the Kurds too?
Sounds like
Yes, literally this.
Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of like what we have going on right now. If you look, now I apologize if you like Trump. I mean, everybody knows that I don't like Trump. It has nothing to do with his politics. It has to do with him as a person. I think he's a bad person. But it was one of the reasons that they had a real problem with the hearings to make sure that you don't have a conflict of interest, like the ethics violations and stuff. And one of the, I don't know if you know this, but there was a Newsweek article that published in 2016, there's actually a series, I think, of literally like, there's a little questionability, I think, in whether or not this was okay. But more or less, I think Hillary Clinton like screenshotted the whole article and like posted it to her Twitter with comments. Which I don't know if you should do that. I don't know if it's like a good thing to do. Is like, I don't know if is that legal. Like you just basically like, give everybody the article without them having to go to the website. I don't know, it seems kind of shady. But anyways, there was a Newsweek article that published like all these possible conflicts of interest that Trump might have, and one of them in big bold letters, not it was big bold letters. There's a whole section on his conflicts of interest in Turkey, and how he has business dealings in Turkey, and there's a lot of money that he has there, money that funnels in and out. And we have the Kurds that are there, and that we're supporting the Kurds. And if it comes down to a decision where he's got to choose between the Kurds' interests and Turkey's interests, he might end up making a decision that helps him more financially. And weirdly enough, this impeachment inquiry happens, and it's almost like he feels like he's in the end game now, where he's like, crap, this isn't going to work out well for me. Because if you've been reading the articles, if you've been looking at the information, Mueller, you remember the Mueller testimony? Mueller testimony, a lot of people, like, Trump reported himself that he was fully exonerated. Bill Barr, the Department of Justice head, he gave out a summary that was an inaccurate representation of Mueller's report. When Mueller actually went and sat down and talked about the report, he was actually very bipartisan. He wouldn't give the Democrats exactly what they wanted, nor would he give the Republicans the full exoneration that they wanted. What he essentially said was that the FBI had enough evidence to prosecute for obstruction of justice, but that's not their job. And you do not prosecute a sitting president. That's FBI policy. So that there's plenty to do obstruction of justice now, which is enough of a crime to be impeachable, but it wasn't bad enough. But then when the Ukraine stuff started happening and the promise of favors started coming out, I think that it became clear, and he's probably talked to some people and like, yeah, you're going to get, like he's probably still not going to get taken out of office because Mitch McConnell, I don't think he's ever going to turn on Trump. He's going to always be like pro-Trump because he's going to be trying to protect a future election. But I really do think that Trump sees the writing on the wall, and he's just trying to like do as many of his friends as many favors as possible in as short a time as possible. So he's like, Turkey's going to want to get their check cashed, so I'm going to cash their check for them. Like, yeah, I pulled the Kurds out, and Turkey's like, thank you. That's what we were hoping for. And I really think that that's a kind of a conflict of it. So the greed, lust for power kind of thing. I mean, if you look at it, Trump is then essentially kind of like a Goneril or Reagan. He's not smart enough to be an Edmund. If you look at Edmund's smart. He's a clever guy.
Yeah. Got his dad to think that his brother was trying to kill him.
I don't know. Sometimes I think Trump really is smart. Because he's a brilliant... no, he's a terrible businessman. He's a brilliant... He's a master of distraction. Like, he always, if people are looking at him over here, he comes up with something over there that you're going to look at instead. You know?
Like a magician.
Kind of, yeah. It's like a magician. Like, he's sleight of hand.
Yeah.
Like, he'll do something...
Hey!
Like, y'all remember that thing, kafef? Like, where he misspelled something?
Coffee? Is it supposed to be coffee?
No, it was like, yeah, it was, I always call it kafef, but Covfefe, and it was like some word you could tell when in context you could tell what it was actually supposed to be, like it was some like word meant to be like situation or something, but he was like so tired of this kafef, and it was, I don't know, I can't remember exactly what it was meant to be, but you could tell if you read it. But then as soon as like he misspells this word, he makes the whole day about it. He's like, and he's like rolling with it. He's like, yeah, that's fun. Because it distracted from the other scandal that he was involved in at the time. So anytime a scandal pops up, you look, he distracts and says, oh, look at this other thing. And sometimes he even does what seems to be insane, which they'll be like, hey, look, he did this illegal thing over here. And he's like, yeah, but I might be racist. You know, it's like, sometimes he's like a master, like sometimes two negatives make a positive somehow. He figures it out.
Well, all that stuff came out, and then
Yeah.
he was, what was the Playboy Playmate, or the porno star.
Yeah, in fact, he almost used that as a distraction against other bad things that were happening.
Yeah, so that came out, and then if you've read anything recently about her, she came back and retracted it and said it was a consensual relationship, like he didn't.
Well, I thought that was the thing the whole time, the consensual relationship.
Well, no, they were trying to make it sound like, and she was trying to make it sound like that he was like paying her for services and like It was like that type of thing. And now when you look at it, it says, no, she came out and said, no, it's a consensual relationship.
Oh, I
It
never
was
read
paid
that.
off for anything, but they made it, that all came
Oh no,
out.
now that actually that I have. Well, I mean, if did she say she was never paid off? Because they have financial records for that.
Yeah, she said
She was
money
paid not to
given.
talk,
Yeah,
but that was the only time she ever received payment for anything.
right.
Oh yeah, well, that's what I thought was the case the whole time.
No, but in the beginning, they were making it sound
Like she prostituted
yeah,
herself
like
to
she
him.
was
Oh, okay.
prostituting herself.
I don't know if
And they
that
were
came in
doing
late, but I
that.
never heard that.
They
part
were
of the story.
doing that because of all the other stuff that was going on.
Yeah, and not only that, but
It was-
because
it was a distraction.
sometimes it's like, if you're murdering 3 people over here, the fact that you took up with a porn star over here isn't as bad. So you're like, oh, this porn star thing. They're like, did you just like murder 3 people? And he's like, I did not have sex with a porn star. Stop. And they're like, and then like, she's doing interviews and she's like, that guy, and he's like, oh, I know, I didn't do
I
it.
have the greatest marriage.
Yeah, it's just crazy. But I mean, this kind of thing. I mean, this is what's happening with everything we have going on right now. Is like the lust and greed for power is like really, if it's affecting the China thing, it's affecting the Trump stuff. Everything is about lust for power and greed.
Lust for power and greed has been around for years in politics.
Yeah.
So it's not like
And it's everywhere.
new.
And the sad thing is usually, even if the problem is, and here's why socialism never works, is usually what happens is, huh? I think everybody feels my.
Socialism doesn't work, TJ.
I literally put a lot of effort into looking around the room all the time. So usually, if you feel me looking at you, it's not
Right
a.
at me, he's like, no, this is why socialism doesn't work.
You were one of 5 sets of eyes I looked at. But the reason it doesn't is because if you have 99% of people who are doing exactly what they're supposed to and living for the public good only, that 1% are going to be like, how do I get more? There's always somebody. Because you've got to have a system in place that won't allow the people who say, I want more, to say that.
Monopoly.
Huh?
Obviously.
Monopoly?
Protection or whatever. I can't remember the word.
Are you talking the game, or are you talking
No, I'm
about?
talking about like the I can't English right now. Okay. Been for 29 hours. The thing where you can't buy every company at this competition. I'll let it monopolize.
Oh, yeah, it's Monopoly. Yeah.
So like that's technically, I guess, at some level.
Yeah.
But they don't want to do that. I mean, what they're wanting is just everybody's equal and everybody's like that's not. We're not. That's not gonna work. We're not. Yeah.
And the thing is, the countries where it does work, I mean, the countries where it does work, where you have like a socialist system in place, it's never pure socialism. There's, I mean, I think Norway, Finland have something that's like a social democracy, where it has distribution of resources, but not all of them, and people still earn what they get from working. Is that how Sweden is too? Where you work hard, you get stuff. Yeah.
But like, if we're gonna look at, I should say right now, like, I'm not a socialist, but like, if we're gonna look at places that are in favor of capitalist or whatever socialist, and the way it works, countries that have less of like an original structure for actual democratic system, capitalism doesn't work there as much, like Central Africa, places like that, as well as Asia. A lot of it doesn't work there because of the way their society was compared to how we are. We're very Western wall. They're very. This is what we need to survive.
And not only that, but like the West has always been very individual, mandate, manifest destiny. You can be whatever you want to be, whereas there's more of a succumbing to higher authority and the importance of the family in Eastern traditions.
Take what I need, or just only what I need.
Yeah.
I want everything.
Do for we, not for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of interesting stuff.
I really thought you said weed.
Me
and not
too.
weed.
Do it for the weed.
Do not do it for the weed. Y'all have a great week. Weekend. Oh, and I'm probably going to be, any quizzes people want me to reopen will probably end up happening.
Well, what about the midterm review?
Oh, yeah, midterm review. Hey, midterm review's right here. If you want to give one to Stacy or hold on to one to give to Stacy, you can. There's that. There's 2 for this table back here. Y'all can pass it down.
2 seconds away from that.
And then 3. I was 2 seconds from just not remembering to do that. Stacy, I think, already left. So if you want, do you want to take one for Stacy too?
I'll just take a picture of it. I'll leave one.
Take a picture of it. Well, if you can only have it, the paper copy, to like write on. So you take it, just put it in your bag, and have a second copy in case Stacy's around. Yeah. Just one page. Huh? The midterm is next Tuesday. Yeah. Now, Emily, your midterm review, it's a piece of paper. It's like this. But what I'm going to do is I used to email it before class to the people at the front. But what happened was a couple of times I had people who got the review and then just left. And they would bring it to them at the beginning of class. So what I'm going to do is send the email now to them. And then they're going to give you a copy of the midterm review. And you can get that printed out right as you leave the building. Is that okay?
So who gets the email with it?
It's just going to be somebody at the front. I'm going to send it to Iris, the Gutierrez.
Okay.
So she should be able to hopefully print it out if you tell her she got it in their email.
Okay. And is our test this coming Tuesday?
Yes. But you'll be allowed to, on the midterm review, you'll be allowed to write as much stuff as you want to on it and bring it to the midterms. You can essentially like write notes and things that you can then bring to it. Oh, I'm actually going to have to send that email. I have to leave the room because I think I have to use our internet's down. Well, hold on, let me check and see if our internet's still down here. Because if it is, I might have to use my iPhone and then go to a place where I can actually get close to a window that actually has service. Let me see. Yeah, it looks like we're still having internet problems. So I'm gonna go back to my original classroom where I can get service, and I'm gonna send the email. So it's gonna be like probably a minute and a half, 2 minutes, but I'll do that real quick. I'm not even gonna take my power cord with me. I'm just gonna run over there real fast. Yeah, you can leave. Just go to the front, and then the midterm review will be there. Bye. Have a great weekend.